I think our culture generally defines masculinity as whatever the famous people are doing. So people who either have lots of resources or fame, masculinity as a trend follows their examples. So if masculinity is, well, if famous people have big bushy beards at the time, then it's masculine to have big bushy beards. If they're clean shaven, then that's what's masculine all of a sudden. So people follow whatever the trend is.
And what are masculine behaviors?
Um, Usually involved with sociability, dominance, extroversion, drive, basically getting other people to look up to you and otherwise, well, for lack of a better word, being underneath you. So so masculinity tends to be focused right now, at least, on becoming the meta peer, becoming the person who the community links up to and things like that. Scrambled at best, undesired at worst. I try not to think in terms of masculinity. I don't particularly like thinking in terms of it, and I don't particularly like associating it with myself, so when people talk about my masculinity, I tend to see that as, okay, here are things that are wrong, as opposed to things that you're doing right. In many ways, I didn't. People tend to assume I know what's going on more than I do, so I guess I picked it up from books, television, things like that, but people I tended to miss certain connections, which I don't have a particular good example for, but I really didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand why people reacted to each other in certain ways, why all of a sudden a certain person in a room, everyone sort of gravitated towards that person, or they were able to command a certain amount of immediate social respect. I'm still pretty blind to most of it. Well, the primary advantages are that's where our society is built around, so for most males, your masculinity defines options for mating, options for employment, career path, basically a great deal of the quality of life that you have is going to come from how well you match up to a particular ideal. Although it should also be noted that because we have such a fractured society, you generally have multiple archetypes to choose from at this point, and then you just have to be sure to interact primarily with the communities that interact with there. For instance, the masculinity definition you have for going out Midwest and dealing with ranchers is very different from inner city, urban, wealthy, or something like that. I mean, they're still going to have their own definitions of this is how a male acts in here, and this is how people are going to like or dislike the person based off that, but the actual implementation ends up being very different, often conflicting with each other. So you just have to choose your culture, or subculture, I guess. Too much is the short answer for that. I mean, besides the fact externally how it affects my industry and the pervasive problems in my industry with gender and gender representation roles, etc., it also has a massive effect on my own life, and the fact I work with my gender so poorly, I'm very aware of the consequences of not working within that archetype very well. And I dwell on it. My feeling of gender lets me be a little bit more fluid with my sexuality. If I'm going to not do very well at matching various archetypes, I have no obligation to match them in those ways either. So I'm a little bit more free than many people to make shit up as I go along. I think a lot of people view masculinity in this is a problem with a lot of archetypes. People view it in absolute term, that whatever is present in their social group at this piece of time, they think it's fundamental or universal, and I think even if they're going to follow the archetype and enjoy the archetype, they should at least be aware that it's arbitrary and can change 20 years down the road. And all of a sudden, pink can go from manly women aren't even allowed to wear it to, oh, pink is a girl's color, and if you wear it as a man, something's wrong with you. In these complete reversals, you have to be aware that they can happen, especially nowadays with the culture moving so quickly. They can happen within a few years. and it's good to be aware of. Look at the different archetypes, find one that you like. And if you're going to go towards any of them, well, find one that resonates with the way you want to be anyway. Do well in that community and be aware that you have to work towards existing in that community as opposed to potentially another one. A classic example, since I was bringing up, say, Midwestern cowboy type of archetype, if you're a Midwestern male, or actually Midwestern female who identifies male, and you're looking at it going, this is the archetype for masculinity, but this urban masculinity that's focuses more on opera and ballet appeals to me more, well, you have an option. Change your peer group. It may not be an easy option, it may not be an economically viable option, but something that can be worked towards, and knowing that you're not locked into whatever you happen to initially be around, well, another good thing to know. I think for the most part I'm just not perceived. There are obviously there are individuals who notice me and interact with me, but I'm a very background person. I am not a role model. I'm not someone that is noticed very often. I'm not a meta peer. I'm not someone who will set a trend or even be used as an example most of the time, and I'm rarely around children. So the best I can do is try to interject a bit of calmness into various internet arguments, and that's probably as far as I'm going to be able to go. It's very annoying. And unfortunately our options for what you can do about it are still relatively limited. I mean, obviously over the last 20 years, 30 years, whatever, there's a lot more flexibility in society, both socially, medically, and just our ability to get up and switch peer groups. I mean, go on the internet now, you probably find some group that agrees with you, and probably about 10 other groups that absolutely hate you, but at least you can find peers nowadays, and I think that's gotten a lot better, but still, we have a long way to go on really being able to give people options there.